Alaloth Champions of the Four Kingdoms is a modern take on the classic RPG. So it takes the engaging depth of a game like Baldur's Gate and then puts a modern twist on it. So players are going to take the role of the champion of Eterist, starting off as someone who's sort of known around town, but ultimately just another face in the crowd. All of that changes as you become the champion of Eterist and start to gain fame by killing dangerous monsters, like a necromancer terrorizing a city, uncovering mysterious artifacts like a statue with a dark history, and helping thin out the roaming bandits that are robbing merchants. Now, all of this helps you grow in strength and complete your search for these lost fragments in order to save the world from Alaloth, the Dark God. It's quite a bit to take in, but it is a pretty decent story and it kept me hooked. So one of the questions you might have is, what does this compare to? Well, the visuals remind me a lot of the classic RPGs of the 2000s. And right, we've seen a little resurgence of this art style with like Pillars of Eternity, and now Alaloth is opting for sort of that like painted background look. Now, the combat in the game is not like Diablo or any other action RPG, but instead it gives players a real-time combat system that requires you to manage stamina, time your dodges, your blocks, your parries, all while having access to spells, attacks, and a variety of ways to engage enemies. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it does take a little bit to get used to. I found myself getting greedy and trying to swing over and over again at enemies, and then found myself dead, or at least very close to it. So you do have to play strategic, even if that means going slower and managing your resources, things like potions, elixirs, things to give you the edge in combat. Now, most of the creatures that you run into will be in something called a fighting area, or a place on the map that you travel to and you enter. Now, there are some roaming enemies on the map, but for the most part, the bulk of your fighting is a planned and kind of something you prepare for. So speaking of the game, this is split into two views, the isometric character view and the map view. Now, the character view is when you're in an area controlling your character, like in a city or a fighting area, while the map view is how you move around the map between all of the landmarks. So here, your character is replaced by a figurine, and you move it around the map to basically go where you want to go. And as you move, the day is going to shift to night and vice versa. There's other enemy figurines on the map. If you run into them, you will engage them and you'll get into a small skirmish. And then if you manage to kill them, you'll get a couple pieces of loot, some gold, some crafting materials, all of that fun stuff. But let's get back to those fighting areas. So these fighting areas are pretty well paced, and they do offer a bunch of different packs of enemies that you can slowly engage and dispatch one by one. Now, the aggro radius is pretty large on these, but they're typically not a ton of enemies, right? You're not fighting hordes of enemies in this game. But you do want to be careful, because once you enter a fighting area, you will not be able to leave or access your inventory. It's either you die and get kicked out, or you win. That's it. It's a very simple process. Now, these areas are where you will be getting the majority of your loot, your crafting materials, your gold, and really just about everything you need for the game, including the quest artifacts that you need to progress the main campaign. So get used to going to fighting areas. Now, all of them have a different theme. It could be a haunted city where you go fight a wraith in order to get this quest item called a ghost light. They could be different little hideouts where like marauders and rogues are hiding. It could be undead arenas. There's a ton of different places, so the variety definitely is there, and you don't feel like you're fighting the same theme of enemies over and over again, which is great, because you can go back and farm these areas. That is something you can definitely do. Now, as you're going through these fighting areas and you're clearing enemies, you're going to come across glowing items that you can pick up. But honestly, the real treasure is at the very end, typically after you fight a boss or a large group of enemies. Now, opening up this chest has a great chance to give you some rare loot to improve your character and then help you tackle harder content. So again, I'm not going to lie, guys, I did get pretty pumped up a few times when I got an epic weapon or an armor piece that really gave my character some juice. I went through and I cleared this like 5 skull kind of fighting area, and it was more difficult than I had done before, so it was a big challenge. And I was able to go in, I cleared it, and it was great. It was one of those things like, oh man, I don't know if I can do it, and then you did it and you're pumped. So all of the items in the game are handcrafted. So every cleaver, for instance, is going to be the same. So don't expect any randomized stats on gear, which kind of takes us to the next piece. Let's talk a little bit about progression in Alaloth. So as you clear fighting areas, you're going to gain a stat point to spend across 4 categories: dexterity, strength, constitution, and intelligence. Each one of these will give you a bundle of stats. Now these can be upgraded multiple times, with each upgrade giving you more of that same bundle. Then you also have a point that you can spend in proficiencies, which gives bonuses depending on what weapon and armor that you want to use. So if you have a favorite playstyle, invest in the proficiencies that best fit. And lastly, you will have some points to spend across Way of Arms, Nature, and Gods. These are your skills that you can activate in combat. Arms is all about weaponry. Nature is for elemental magic and nature magic, things like summoning a dryad. And Gods is for magic like necromancy, holy magic, and Templars. Now you can pick and choose how you want to spend your points. You don't have to commit to one of these. So right now I'm a dual wielding poison warden that can summon a dryad to help take the aggro off of me and then allow me to kind of, skirt around and unleash some damage onto enemies behind them. It's a great playstyle. I'm having a decent time with it. It's been fun and it's been working out pretty well, especially against bosses. So let's wrap this whole thing up with some pros and cons. So from my 10 hours so far, I think the game has great visuals. Immediately, that was one of the things I noticed is, wow, I really like the game, the way this game looks. It just looks good. It has good combat and a decent story. The game definitely pulls you in, keeps you hooked, and kind of drip feeds content a little bit. So as you go to different cities, as you go to different fighting areas, you're sort of gonna unlock a little bit more lore about the world, how things became the way they are, and it kind of keeps you pulling along, right? Just kind of pulling on that thread a little bit. Now, granted, I played a ton of these types of games growing up, so there may be a nostalgia factor for me that the younger gamers might not have. But these three things have been very enjoyable. Now, in terms of improvements, I do think they need to take a little bit more modern approach to the quality of life of things. So one of the big things is being able to quickly exit town to reduce the amount of running back and forth would be awesome. I spent tons of time simply running across town to access the world map instead of being able to press a hotkey or clicking on the map icon in order to quickly exit the city. I understand that's part of the kind of RPG, the engagement of it, but at the same time, when you don't have a ton of time to play and you want to maximize what you're doing, being able just to click the map icon to then exit into the map would be fantastic. Number two, items not having random stats is a double-edged blade. Now, right, don't get me wrong, what they have out there is exciting and you can get an item where you're like, oh, that's really great. But at the same time, you don't get excited. And the reason is, if every single cleaver, like I mentioned, is the exact same version, and you're like, I really don't like the way that thing functions, then you're not going to get excited when you get a cleaver because you already know what it is. It's not like there could be some new kind of attribute on it that kind of changes your perspective. It just isn't that way. And I know this isn't a Diablo-like, but it does take some of the excitement away. Now, I also appreciate the idea of fighting areas and how they're high risk, high reward, and I really like that. I like the approach they're taking, right, by not letting you access your inventory. However, I do wish I was still able to access my journal or my quest log to see if I'm making progress on the thing I need to make progress in. It was very frustrating having to finish the full area and then check to see how close I was, only to rerun it again. And it was one of those things. It's very small, but I'm surprised that you weren't able to do it. I could see being able to open the inventory and there's this big lock icon, hey, you can't change anything you're doing in here, but you can still pull your journal out and look at it. I wish you could be able to do that. So all in all, Alaloth Champions of the Four Kingdoms is a fun game, and I think it'll certainly appeal to the generation of gamers who played RPGs during the 2000s. The refreshing take on the combat mixed with the visuals definitely pulled me in and kept me hooked. Now, the story was decent and there were some areas to improve. However, the game did keep me engaged and hooked for multiple hours at a time, especially in a world where there are tons of other options to choose from. So if you're interested in checking this game out, you can click on the link in the description below. Alaloth is available right now on Steam for $25. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.